Hi guys. Uh, this is your course director, Tom Shannon, and this is the video guide to the faculty guide for Ruth Barzcic. Ruth Barzcic is an arrhythmia case. Specifically, it's atrial fibrillation. Okay. Um, so we'll start with the usual readiness assessment, and we'll go and then go into activity one. Now you'll notice that activity one is not a clinical reasoning exercise. There's no clinical reasoning in the CBCL. It's actually being done as part of the clinical skills session in the afternoon. So you needn't worry about that. We can jump right into activity one. I think that this will make this uh, uh, this CBCL reasonably short, and I think that's okay. Nobody ever complains that a CBCL is, nobody ever complains the session's too short unless it's really short. And I think this will be adequate. Other than the absence of the clinical reasoning, I think we've got plenty here. So the first activity is centered around this vignette. It was written by Ann Hartley, and you can text her if there's a problem with it. You can also contact me. I actually have the A part of this, and she has the B part. So we have a guy here, and he basically, he's got atrial fibrillation. Here is his ECG, and this is given to the students. Okay, and his blood pressure is not great. It's 110/84. His heart rate's high. It's 140. And all of a sudden, he's not feeling too good, and he crashes. Here's the EKG. He crashes. His heart rate goes up to 158. His blood pressure is now down to 90/60. So our quick thinking hero intern decides to go with carotid massage. And so she applies pressure to the carotid sinus, and the heart rate drops to 106, and the blood pressure rises to 108/72. So we've asked them to do two things. You can contact me for either one of these, or Ann. The first is just to draw a diagram of the structures involved in the response here. So basically what you're doing with carotid massage is you're initiating a baroreflex. So you're increasing the pressure locally at the carotid sinus. That increases potential, and we've just asked them to draw the structures here. So the structure leading from the carotid sinus to the medulla is the sinus nerve, which I believe, yeah, here it is right here. It's cranial nerve 9. For the record, you get an increased potentials here with the increased pressure in the sinus. And then the reflex response is initiated, and the vagus nerve, you get increase in parasympathetic tone. ACH is released there, and you get a decrease in sympathetic tone. And in the ganglion, here and here, you have ACH released. And then at the nerve endings, for the sympathetic side, you have less norepinephrine released here. At the same time, you have increased output to the vasculature. These are sympathetic nerves again, but they release NE onto the smooth muscle, or ACH onto the endothelial cells. So some of these fibers will be sympathetic cholinergic fibers that actually release ACH, and they should know that, and you should point them to that. And then we have preganglionic nerve that goes to the adrenal medulla and releases ACH. The adrenal medulla really pretty much acts like one big postganglionic neuron. That's all it is, and it secretes epinephrine instead of norepinephrine. It secretes it into the bloodstream, so that participates in this response as well. And then Here's another diagram from Adam Wilson that's a little bit better drawn, more realistic. I expect you'll get something closer to this out of them. I know I couldn't draw that as good as either one of these. And then the B part of this is draw a concept map that actually shows how the carotid sinus massage leads to the vital signs. And this is what we see here. We have an increase in local pressure, and that increases impulses to the medulla, that decreases the heart rate. And this is where the students will get messed up because they're used to thinking decreased heart rate, decreased cardiac output. But because the heart rate is so high, you've actually impinged on filling time, which doesn't ordinarily happen, but during pathology, it can if the heart rate gets high enough, and here it's high enough. So we've decreased filling with a high heart rate. And so what happens is that decreases stroke volume, and that decreases cardiac output in the patient who's crashing. So by decreasing the heart rate, we actually increase the filling time and increase stroke volume and increase cardiac output, and that brings the MAP back up. So this will catch them because they're used to drawing this connection here. Instead, the decreased heart rate, instead of decreasing cardiac output, it's actually increasing cardiac output because it's decreasing the heart rate enough to where you're getting closer to a normal filling, okay? So that is really the point of this exercise, and that will require some explaining. That's why I'm emphasizing it here, because the tendency is to go decrease cardiac output, decreased MAP, and then in this case, it's increasing the stroke volume and increasing the MAP. So this will be a good exercise for them as long as they understand that if you're exercising on a treadmill, this isn't what happens. You're not limiting the filling in a normal person during normal exercise, but if you increase the heart rate high enough during pathology, it can limit the filling time, and then something like this will actually result in an increased cardiac output. It's a very confusing point, so that's why I'm emphasizing it here. Okay, that's enough for one activity. We thought it's fairly long, very tough to figure out, going to take some explanation. So we're going to launch into some physiology and pharmacology for activity 2. This first activity is physiology. So we'd like them to look at the EKG from activity 1. And of course, it's atrial fibrillation, and they will know that, I assume. Certainly by now here they will. We asked them to, I asked them, you can ask either Mike or myself about this. We asked them to construct a concept map that starts with atrial fibrillation and describes basically what the effects are on electrical conduction through the heart and to explain the relevant characteristics of the EKG. So here is my version of this. Atrial fibrillation gives you no P wave, and it gives you a random irregular rhythm here, and therefore irregularly spaced QRS complexes and tachycardia, because your action potentials are randomly hitting the AV node, but they're hitting them faster than usual. And that's fairly simple. I think most of them will understand that. And then the second part of this is to add on to that concept map and describe what happens with a calcium channel blocker. And so with a calcium channel blocker, you increase the threshold potential in the AV node, which reduces the it reduces the probability of the firing, but what it really does is it helps contribute to a slower propagation through the AV node. That and the slower upstroke in the AV node also slows the propagation, and so it takes longer for this action potential to get through the AV node. It basically prolongs the PQ interval. And you increase the refractory period because of this slower upstroke in the AV node. And so your action potentials are still hitting the AV node, but they're not actually causing a depolarization. And so the rate at which your ventricular at what your ventricle beats slows down. Okay, and so we get a slower rate of ventricular depolarization and rate of contraction. At the same time, this is a side effect of the calcium channel blockers. You get reduced calcium-induced calcium release, and you get reduced stroke volume, and you get a reduced cardiac output. So you have to be fairly careful with them. If you overdose people, you'll reduce the cardiac output to the point where you may do some harm. But otherwise, this is just basically a side effect of the channel blockers. Okay. And then Mike has a question here about alternate therapy, including adenosine, and explain the rationale for using adenosine and its mechanism of action. We didn't ask for a concept map there. This is still my explanation of the EC coupling, and the adenosine explanation is here, and this was written by Mike. Okay, and basically it's binding to the receptor and reducing cyclic AMP. Okay, and that reduces the impulse velocity pretty much the way that a beta blocker would. You're reducing L-type calcium channel activity, and basically from there on it's like a calcium channel blocker. Okay. And then Mike has an anticoagulant coagulation management question. I will fill in the number here. So this is question 2. And he asks for really questions about the mechanism of action of heparin and warfarin, and about the side effects. So this is kind of like, it's mostly clinical pharmacology, but there's some mechanism here. And he's got a fairly long explanation here. And then we have our take-home points and debrief. And that's it. So thanks. You guys know where to get me if you have any questions. And you'll know where to get me during the session because I'll be around. But the contact information is all here. Okay? There. Thanks.